Hey guys, Bill the Appraiser back with a new episode of All About Appraisals. Been out for a couple of weeks probably, had a terrible cold, and if you could have heard my voice, you did not want me to make a video at that point. You may not want me to make a video now, but at that point, it really sounded bad. But you may hear me cough a couple of times, like now. Excuse me. Not going to edit that out since I don't edit. You may hear me cough a couple of times, but this episode is just called "A Day in the Life." 10 crazy things that can happen to appraisers, and these are just incidental things. This is meant to be both entertaining and informative, because hopefully there'll be some good to be had from these stories. And I'm just going to go and jump in. I got my list here, so forgive me for looking at this. But anyway, yeah, I had done one years ago where I was relatively sure that someone had probably been murdered in the house. As I recall, my wife and I went there on like a Saturday morning, and had an appointment, and then they had all this carpet, on the front porch that it looked like there were red stains and such. And then someone did eventually come to the door, and or actually they came outside, and they appeared to have been injured, and so hard to say exactly what was going on there. Their arm was in a sling kind of thing, and they really didn't, want us there, and were anxious to have us leave. So, did not report that to authorities. Probably should have, but never heard anything else about it. So who knows? Could have been something else. It was just a bizarre situation, and so glad to put that one in the rearview mirror for sure. Excuse me. Yeah, I went to a house a couple years ago, and back at the primary bedroom, there was the usual door you would expect there to be for linens and soap and shampoo and whatnot. But I noticed that the door had a combination lock on it, and so the homeowner, I think, had kind of seen me looking at the combination lock, and so he was saying, "Hey, I bet you want to know what's behind that door." And so of course I did want to know what was behind that door, and so he did the combo, and opened the door, and it was an absolute arsenal of firearms and such. Nothing illegal, I guess, as far as I know, but it was just chock full of every weapon you can imagine, things from hatchets to AK this, AK that, shotguns of various natures, handguns, pistols, all sorts of stuff, nunchucks. And I think he was a bit of a prepper, and so there seemed to be some food and water in there as well, some of the freeze-dried type stuff. And so I thought that was interesting. And now where I live is fairly rural, and so I see a lot of people that have firearms. I see a lot of people that have gun safes and such, which is a good thing. I want to keep those out of kids' reach and such. So saw something recent in regard to that kind of thing. So I'll try to remember to come back at the end and touch on that. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. We'll try. So yeah, just kind of interesting. So just looking at my list here once again. Yeah, I had gone to a property a couple of years ago, and there are different loan types. There's conventional, there's FHA, there's USDA. Conventional is fairly easy to deal with. It's pretty forgiving. Although, as I've said before, conventional, none of the loan types will allow anything to pass that could be considered a safety issue or safety hazard, something like that. And so, and I've had that come up from agents on occasion where, it'll be conventional and I'll call something out because it's a safety hazard. And then the agents just kind of lose their mind because they're saying, well, I've been doing this 30 years and I've never heard of an appraisal or appraiser calling anything out on a conventional, and the thing is, nobody wants to be on the hook, right? Nobody wants to be the bad guy. The lender doesn't want to be the bad guy, the reviewer doesn't want to be the bad guy, the underwriter, and so on and so forth on down the line. So if something's a safety issue, it's a safety issue and it has to be fixed. So having said that, I'm sorry, I kind of got sidetracked here. So, again, my wife, also an appraiser, she and I go to this property, and it's FHA. And again, we live in a rural community, and so a lot of the homes are old or older. And truth be told, I've kind of changed my philosophy on some of this. At this point, I really don't take on FHA assignments or even USDA assignments if the home is more than about 20 years old, just because it's probably not going to work. And I've found that lenders do a relatively poor job of explaining to homeowners how FHA and USDA work. I think maybe they might ask the homeowner, hey, how's your house look? Is it in pretty good shape? Got any issues? But they don't really delve into the nitty gritty, and they don't say, do you have peeling paint? Do you have damaged wood? Do you have any broken windows? Do you have any safety issues and that kind of thing, which would help things out a lot. But anyway, and these questions had apparently not been asked of this homeowner. And so my wife and I get there, and we're both kind of looking at each other, sort of shaking our head, because there's all sorts of FHA issues everywhere, being peeling paint, damaged wood. And so we're kind of talking between ourselves, amongst ourselves. And then the wife kind of materializes, and we sort of say something to her about it. And she's just shaking her head, and she's like, he's worked so hard on this and everything else. And so, but we say, well, we don't have to say anything about it. But if we don't, that just means we're going to go ahead, do the full report, submit it with all of these issues numbered out, labeled out. And so anyway, we eventually get around to mentioning these things to the gentleman, and he basically says, leave now, because he didn't want to hear it. And so again, that tells me that the lender did a very poor job of explaining to them the way FHA works. Otherwise, this has not been a surprise to him. And so we left. At that point, we, as I recall, we got paid what's called a trip fee, because the homeowner did not want us to complete the report. And so we did not. But again, the appraiser, if they go and do their work, they're entitled to some sort of compensation due to the travel time they put in, as well as the time they spent, measuring and photographing and everything. And then ultimately, the appraiser usually has to send in some sort of a little mini report, at least with photos, if nothing else, to prove to the lender that they actually did go to the property, and that, and they interact with the homeowners, they're taking photos, and now the deal has kind of gone south, so to speak. And so the appraiser still gets some sort of compensation, even though they don't get the full fee. So there you go. Had a situation, again, just kind of interesting, funny, and kind of a sad, bizarre sort of way. Had done a home as new construction, and then ended up going back a year or so later, maybe 18 months, I forget, for a refi, which isn't that unusual. Lenders, AMCs, they like to send things back to the original appraiser if they can. One, because I think that in their minds, that's going to be quicker than sending it to a new appraiser, because potentially, in theory, the original appraiser may already have a sketch, et cetera, et cetera. And as I recall, I think when I went back through the final inspection on it as new construction, I might have met the wife, because it's not that unusual with new construction when an appraiser goes back for the final inspection, which is really supposed to happen before people move in, but it doesn't always happen that way. I'm sure very often they probably tell the bank, oh, wow, our lease is up, we need to go ahead and move in, even though we're not really supposed to, we're gonna go ahead and move in, and they do, and the lender gives them the thumbs up to do that. But I went back to do this refinance, and so, didn't plan on being there long because I already had a sketch. At least the contour, from the plans and specs provided to me when I did the original appraisal. Anyway, I finally get around asking the homeowner, where his lovely wife is. It's about 3:30 in the afternoon at this point, as I recall. And he says, oh, well, he kind of looks at his watch and says, oh, this time of day, probably with her boyfriend. So, sorry I put my foot in my mouth on that one. But of course, I had no way of knowing. And then, of course, I offered my condolences, so to speak, and he's like, not a problem, probably for the best. I don't think they had obviously had any children of their own together. In the meantime, I think he had his, she had hers, and so they just were going to end up going their separate ways. But, you never know. You never know. I may have brought this up before, kind of interesting, and I've seen several, and actually seen a new one recently where doing the inspection, or what we call kind of site visit or site observation. As I've probably said before, a lot of appraisers are trying to get away from the word inspection, because a lot of people tend to confuse the word inspection when an appraiser uses it and when a home inspector uses it, and they're two totally different procedures. So let me get back to this just one second, so sorry. Yeah, I have seen several homes, and one recently where you have a primary bedroom and a primary bathroom, and there's no wall between the bedroom and the bathroom. It's just the bedroom and the bathroom are one great big open area. And for some people, that might be just fine. For other people, that's a little bit unusual. I saw one home where they had done some remodeling, and I think originally there had been, I think the only full bath was in the primary bedroom. They were kind of changing that to put it in the hall so it was accessible to the other bedroom. But for whatever reason, they just couldn't bring themselves to remove the toilet in the primary bedroom. And so now you had this brand new full bath kind of there in the hall where guests and people from the other bedroom could use it. But they just couldn't bring themselves to take the toilet out of the primary bedroom. And so again, you had this toilet just right there in the middle of the primary bedroom, and no shower curtain, no walls, no door, no nothing, just right there in the middle of the room. So different strokes, different strokes. None for me, I'm good. Did one, I probably mentioned this before, just last year, I think. We do a fair amount of private work, and this happened to be for a divorce. And the individual, they had bought the house a couple of years ago. I think they paid about $500 for it. The husband had engaged our services. I think we appraised her for about $7.25. And it's all about perspective, of course. And the husband was about to lose his mind because he was apparently going to be buying the wife out. And so, he did not like our number at 7.25. And then he's saying, oh, there's nothing worth that in this area, yada, yada, yada. So, I had made a deal with him. You have another appraisal done. If it comes in under my number, pay that appraiser, don't pay me. If it comes in above my number, pay us both. And so he, true to his word, I have to give him credit. I gave him 2 or 3 names, and I said, I will not contact these people, but all these people are good. Pick one, call them, have them do another appraisal. And they did, and their number came in $25,000 above my number. And so, also goes to show you that every property is worth a range of value. And at that particular price point, approximately $700,000, a difference of $25,000 is not, unusual necessarily. So, I just thought that was very interesting, very telling. It's always good to be kind of vindicated, validated. And so I was very pleased and have to give the homeowner credit. The first thing he said when he called me was, I need to apologize. I was wrong. And so that's great, because let's face it, most of us don't get a whole lot of that these days. Yeah, I did one recently where, in the interest of full disclosure, the owner didn't really disclose to me, and normally this would come up because when people call me, I do a lot of private work. Basically, they're looking for the answer to 2 questions. The first question is how much, and the second question is how long, and vice versa. How long will it take? And so, we generally tell them, well, we can usually get to you within a week to 10 days, and then we can usually get you the report within a week to 10 days after that. And so kind of a 2 to 3 week timeline. So if you're good with that, we're good with that. And in the meantime, we're talking, they're telling us about the property and telling us about the biz and that. And with this one, for some reason, the individual actually the house happened to sit on 50 acres, which is huge, of course. And the individual did not disclose that. They didn't offer that up. I didn't realize that until the morning that I was going to be going to the property. And that's also a huge impact on the fee. And so I quoted one fee, just assuming, a smaller amount of acreage, a couple of acres, in the home. It was a little bit further away than I normally go, but within our scope of work, our orbit, so to speak. And so, and I was trying to, gently and professionally and politely explain that, the fee that I quoted was really not appropriate given this undisclosed acreage. And they really didn't get that. And so, again, it's just, you never know. And was that done deliberately from the get-go? I don't think so. By the same token, they didn't really seem to want to step up and, do the right thing necessarily, because what I had said was, nowadays with AI, and even things like Google, Google has its own AI, which is called Gemini. And so you can just go to Google and ask a question, and you can say, well, I have a 35-acre parcel in XYZ city in this state or the other state. How much should I expect to pay for the appraisal? And it will give you numbers, and it will give you an explanation, it will give you a range. And I had suggested this homeowner do that to kind of get a better idea of what was an appropriate fee, and they didn't want to do that. So, me trying to be as polite and professional as possible, I accepted the token improvement they offered on the original appraisal I quoted, and just chalked that up to experience. and remind myself every time someone calls, make sure you get all the information up front, because you never know. On more than one occasion, I've had people offer me something to drink. Normally it's non-alcoholic, but on occasion it is alcoholic, which is kind of funny to me. I'm just wondering, gosh, do these people really think that I should be, drinking alcohol while I'm at their property? Would they think that's okay? And of course, I hope all appraisers would say no to that, regardless of whether they normally drink or not. But especially if anything were to go south with the appraisal, then I think that would be one of the first things brought up was, hey, well, I gave the appraiser a beer, gave the appraiser 2 beers, whatever. So needless to say, I said no, and that problem went away. Although, as I recall, in that particular, both those situations were the ones I remember, the problem and more. Both homeowners were more than happy to indulge in a couple of beverages while I was doing my job. Um, I was at a house, again, live in a fairly rural area. I remember the homeowner, I was standing in the front yard because normally I arrive at a property, hop out of my truck, have a bit of a conversation with the homeowner, do my thing, go inside, come back out, measure, et cetera, et cetera. But at one point, the homeowner had said, right where you're standing is where the bear was last week. And so immediately I start looking around to see if Yogi or Boo Boo have come back to visit, because I don't want to spend any time with them. Yeah, yeah. On occasion, I have something where people, I guess, again, lenders, etc., have not done a very good job of explaining to homeowners how the appraisal process works. That they don't say, okay, they don't have a video, they don't have something that they send to homeowners so homeowners understand how the appraisal process works. And so, I've gone to a couple of properties where they are almost, I don't know what the word is, incredulous. They can't hardly believe when I say, well, I'll be taking photos. They see me with my phone in my hand, and they know that everyone has a camera. Everyone has a phone, and the phone has a camera, so I'm gonna be taking pictures. And a couple of people just expressed concern. A couple of people have called their lender and said, shut this down. I don't want people taking photos of my home. And then one person I thought was very interesting, who was very, very nice about the whole thing. But I got the property, rung the doorbell, got no response. So I'm just kind of walking around taking photos of things that I know that I'll need photos of. And all of a sudden I kind of hear someone whistling on the other side of the fence. And so then I kind of yell out and get that person's attention. And he kind of comes up, on the stoop, I guess, concrete slab, so that we can see each other. And, his first question was, you don't need to come in, do you? Which, of course, I do need to come in. I mean, there are different types of appraisals, but for the most part, when an appraiser goes to a property, they're looking to go into the property, and that's generally, most everyone understands that. And so I explained to him, yes, that I did need to come inside, and so he was quick to tell me that, well, he was so sorry, but he would not be able to let me inside. And if that meant canceling the appraisal, then that's what we would do, that he would cancel the appraisal, but he simply would not let me come inside. So I don't know what he had to hide, who knows? But anyway, again, that was one of those where that got canceled. I, as the appraiser, for my time and trouble for driving to the property, trying to do my job, I got paid a fee of some sort, what we call a trip fee. Not a tremendous amount, certainly not equal to the full appraisal, but I got paid something for my time and trouble. So just kind of crazy that people will do that. I'm just looking right quick. I've had a couple over the years. Now I'm going to roll these last two in together, kind of wrap this up, because I hadn't really planned for this to be 20 minutes, but it is, and that's okay. I think it's good information. Interesting, I'd had people contact me because they had a home built that was very, very energy efficient. And so, and obviously I'm sure it was expensive, and this was several years ago, so not super recent, but, and they were wanting, because some homeowners believe if they have an appraisal that says their home is worth X, then someone will pay them X for that property, which is, of course, is not true, because they're two totally different things. What the buying public will pay and how much an appraisal comes in at are two totally different things. I won't say absolutely unrelated, but two totally different things. And so they were wanting an appraisal that said it was worth X, whether that's 400,000 or 500,000, I don't know at this point, don't remember, but they were hoping for that so that they could turn around and tell people, well, the appraisal says it's worth 400,000 or 500,000, so that's what we're looking to get for it. And so, they kept harping to me on the green aspect, and, in the nicest, most polite, professional way that I could, I kind of said, no one cares, at least not in this part of the country. In other parts of the country, California, who knows where, maybe they care a bit more. Around here, they don't. And so they're not going to pay the extra. So it's all about what is the market willing to pay? Contributory value, market reaction. How much does the buying public care about what you've got? You know, they don't generally care about that kind of thing, I'm sorry to say. So I had to tell them I can't help you because I can't give you the appraisal you want. You're only going to be disappointed with my final product, so let's just not do this. Anyway, I hope this was interesting. Hope this was enlightening to a certain extent. If you got any other ideas, feel free to please hit like and subscribe. I thought this was a pretty good video, entertaining as well as informative. So thank you so much for tuning in, and see you again on the next video. Have a great day. Thanks so much.